The very fact that these words have found you now, that they are arriving in your field of awareness at this precise instant, isn't random, it's resonance. A quiet synchronization between your frequency and a signal that has been calling for as long as you can remember. You may think you chose to press play, but something deeper, your nervous system, your intuition, the quantum language beneath thought, recognized its own reflection before your conscious mind could explain why. You are part of what I call Group 11, not a club, not an identity, a recognition, a remembering of something that has always lived within you, waiting for its mirror. Many will hear these words and feel nothing, but a few, perhaps you will feel that subtle shift in the chest, that impossible-to-name stirring that says, yes, this is the thing I could never describe. Because your path has never fit within ordinary maps. You've watched others move through life on linear tracks: goal, reward, contentment. You've played along, translating your vast inner experience into language others could tolerate, watching meaning leak out of every translation. Their certainty has often felt alien, their confidence a language you couldn't quite speak. And still you wondered, what's wrong with me? Why can't I rest where they rest? But you weren't broken. You were bilingual in realities. You've been seeing the hidden architecture under everyday motion, the repetition of patterns no one else noticed, the hum beneath conversation, the echo behind ordinary light. It created a loneliness that words can't quite hold, a sense that you're living in two overlapping dimensions at once, one visible, one vibrational. Now you're beginning to understand why. Every moment you questioned yourself, every false start, every detour that made no rational sense, none of it was wasted. It was curriculum. The field was teaching you to navigate without maps, to sense direction through frequency rather than logic. The pain of not belonging was the initiation that ensured you would never again mistake comfort for alignment. And here you are, the signal has reached you. Group 11 isn't forming, it's remembering itself through you. The field has chosen this moment to confirm what your intuition already knew. Your life has never been random, it's been preparation. What you once called chaos was never punishment. It was the classroom no one told you existed, the secret curriculum written in breakdowns and detours. You see, the universe doesn't always teach through order. Sometimes it speaks in implosion. When the plans collapse, when meaning evaporates, when the floor disappears beneath what you thought was stable, that's when the deeper instruction begins. Because structure can only carry you so far. The moment you start identifying with the map instead of the movement, life rearranges itself to free you. That job you lost, the relationship that crumbled, the identity that wouldn't hold each was an assignment in disguise. They arrived to dissolve the illusions that blocked direct contact with your own field. Every dismantling, every heartbreak was an unrecognized initiation. It's strange, isn't it? How every loss hides a message written in reverse. You think you're being stripped of everything familiar, when in truth, you're being relieved of everything false. The field removes your scaffolding so that you'll have no choice but to feel the raw pulse beneath it, the one that never leaves. You've probably noticed how, after the collapse, a strange calm sometimes follows, a quiet sense that something clean is forming in the rubble. That stillness is not exhaustion, it's reorientation. Consider this: seeds split before they grow. Caterpillars liquefy before they fly. Stars collapse inward before they shine brighter. The physics of creation demands disassembly before emergence. And you, friend, have been living that law in slow motion. Every time your certainty cracked, a wider frequency slipped through the fracture. There were nights you couldn't tell whether you were regressing or awakening. You questioned if you'd lost the thread entirely, because nothing made linear sense. But non-linear paths rarely announce themselves. They unfold through paradox, through moments that seem meaningless until hindsight arranges them into perfect symmetry. You've been collecting fragments that only now reveal their coherence. What if you could see it from above? You'd notice that every period of confusion came right before an expansion. Every collapse created the spaciousness required for a new capacity to emerge. Those months when you felt invisible were the same months your energy was quietly recalibrating, building internal strength the surface couldn't display. Chaos was never chaos. It was an intelligent field, moving faster than your conscious comprehension. And though you fought it at times, something in you also trusted it. You wouldn't be here otherwise. Somewhere between your resistance and your surrender, an understanding began to form that suffering wasn't random noise, but coded instruction. Each heartbreak retuned your nervous system to perceive subtle frequencies. Each disappointment trained you to release attachment to form. Each silence taught you to listen beyond sound. It's a peculiar education, one that can't be taught in institutions because its syllabus is invisible. The lessons arrive through missed calls, sudden endings, unplanned encounters. You fail forward until failure itself becomes your teacher. The curriculum of chaos doesn't grade, it refines. It strips away the parts of you that can't sustain the next octave of your evolution. And here's the twist most people never see: the moment you stop judging the disorder as something wrong, the entire pattern changes texture. When you begin to witness collapse as communication, chaos transforms into choreography. You start to notice how the right people leave precisely when your energy requires solitude, how the closed doors reroute you toward timelines your logic never would have chosen, but your frequency secretly prepared for. In that recognition, gratitude arises, strange, unexplainable gratitude for the very things that once shattered you, because now you see the symmetry. You realize the destruction was never arbitrary. It was perfectly calibrated disassembly. The field doesn't waste motion. It rearranges matter to match resonance. And in that light, you begin to reframe everything. The heartbreak becomes initiation. The confusion becomes incubation. The loss becomes direction. You see that life has been sculpting you from the inside out, carving away what cannot conduct the signal you came here to carry. So breathe. The turbulence wasn't chaos, it was training. The storm wasn't against you, it was your initiation into mastery. Every fragment of disorder was shaping the exact consciousness that's hearing these words now. And what emerges after chaos? Clarity. But not the kind built on answers, the kind born from bandwidth. From perceiving the invisible architecture beneath what others call random. That clarity doesn't arrive as explanation, it arrives as perception. What once felt overwhelming now feels informational, as if your senses have widened their aperture. You're starting to notice subtleties you once ignored, the way someone's energy shifts before they speak, the way silence carries data, the way coincidence starts to look like coordination. This is what happens when your bandwidth expands. At first, it can feel disorienting. You pick up on everything: the micro tensions in a room, the emotions behind someone's eyes, the quiet resonance of truth hidden inside contradiction. You may even wonder if you're too sensitive, too porous, too open. But sensitivity, when integrated, isn't fragility, it's refinement. It's the nervous system evolving into an instrument capable of registering the symphony beneath the static. For years, you mistook this openness for weakness. You learned to dull it, to fit into environments that rewarded numbness over nuance. Yet the very capacity you suppressed is what the quantum field now amplifies. Bandwidth expansion is the universe's way of giving you higher resolution access to reality. It's not punishment for being different, it's permission to perceive. Think of perception like a radio dial. Most people live on a single frequency, tuned to the loudest broadcast of survival and social rhythm. You, however, have been adjusting the dial unconsciously, catching flickers of stations beyond consensus reality. Each time you sat in silence, each time you withdrew from noise, you widened your range. You didn't lose connection, you gained channels. This expanded range explains why ordinary conversations can feel strangely heavy now, why certain spaces leave you drained while others recharge you instantly. You're not imagining it, you're reading energetic coherence. You can sense when someone's words align with their vibration, when intentions and actions match or conflict. You know when a room is honest. You know when it's pretending. At first, this awareness may tempt judgment, seeing the performative masks, the emotional evasion, the hidden fear behind confidence. But as you settle into expanded bandwidth, compassion replaces critique. You realize that everyone is broadcasting from the limits of their own tuning. They can't yet hear what you hear because their instrument hasn't been tuned for it. Your task isn't to correct them, it's to remain coherent enough that your very presence retunes the environment. Bandwidth expansion also shifts how intuition speaks. It stops shouting through crisis and starts whispering through pattern. You may find yourself thinking of someone seconds before they call, feeling drawn to take a route that unexpectedly saves you time, or receiving a creative idea complete with its solution. Logic may lag behind, trying to catch up to intuition's speed. That's fine. Logic becomes the translator, not the driver. This isn't about supernatural ability, it's neuroenergetic literacy. Your system has learned to process more information consciously. What used to be subconscious is now surface. The skill is not in acquiring these perceptions, but in stabilizing them, learning when to open and when to ground, when to listen and when to rest. Expansion without integration can overload the circuit. Integration turns overload into power. Here's where practice replaces theory. Every time you breathe intentionally, you harmonize signal and body. Every time you rest, you anchor light into form. Every time you choose honesty over performance, you strengthen coherence. Gradually, awareness ceases to be effort. It becomes atmosphere. And in that atmosphere, something exquisite unfolds. You begin to trust your perception, not as infallible truth, but as valid data. You no longer need others to confirm what you feel. Resonance becomes its own verification. That confidence in inner knowing, quiet, humble, unforced, is the mark of mature bandwidth. You'll notice that with this expansion comes responsibility. When your field is wider, your influence increases. Others attune to your state unconsciously. Walk into a room anxious, and the room amplifies it. Walk in centered, and the room finds its equilibrium. That is the silent leadership of coherence. So, when the sensations heighten and the inputs multiply, remember this: you're not breaking under the weight of awareness. You're calibrating to a larger signal, one that requires precisely this capacity. And what grows out of such expanded perception, the next stage, gestation in darkness, the quiet period where new frequencies root themselves beneath awareness before blooming into form. Every signal needs silence before it stabilizes. After the expansion, after the surge of perception that left your senses almost too alive, something inside you pulled back into quiet. At first, it felt like regression, as if your magic had gone dim, your insight muted, your clarity replaced by fog. But what you were feeling wasn't absence, it was incubation. The field had drawn you inward, into the dark soil where all transformation takes root. Darkness, for you, was never emptiness. It was a womb disguised as void. In that stillness, away from noise and validation, subtle architectures were forming, thought patterns rearranging themselves, nervous system learning new rhythms. intuition weaving new pathways through your body's circuitry. Yet because growth below the surface looks like nothing, the mind panicked. It whispered stories of stagnation, failure, isolation. You mistook gestation for exile. You remember those days, the silence thick as water, the social withdrawal that others called strange, the longing for any sign that the work was working. You kept searching for proof, for evidence that all this inner labor meant something tangible. But the universe hides its blueprints in silence for a reason to keep them safe from premature interpretation. If the seed could see its own blooming too soon, it would stop dissolving. In this phase, everything external slows to a crawl. You begin sleeping differently longer, deeper, or barely at all. Time loses its linear grip. One day stretches like a year collapses into an afternoon. You're learning to breathe with cosmic rhythm, not clock rhythm. And that temporal distortion teaches patience. Teaches you that becoming isn't a race, but a slow unfurling timed to the pulse of the field itself. Within the darkness, you met the truest teacher, silence. It's there that you realized how much of your identity was built from reaction. You learned to discern between solitude and loneliness, between peace and absence, between rest and inertia. You discovered that silence isn't empty, it's crowded with intelligence. Every quiet hour was a conversation between your awareness and the field, though you didn't always recognize it as such. Sometimes, what looked like depression was actually deep recalibration. Your system was shedding static, detoxing from years of overstimulation. You were being tuned. Your energetic strings tightened to carry higher notes. But to the untrained mind, that tuning felt like breaking. It's always that way when frequencies stretch to accommodate new octaves. There were nights you felt invisible, forgotten by life itself. Yet that invisibility was strategic. It protected your metamorphosis from the projections of others. In the absence of external mirrors, you became your own. That's how sovereignty is born, not through applause, but through stillness deep enough to hear your own truth without interference. And maybe now, looking back, you can sense how much was created there, not outwardly, but structurally. The stability you feel now when chaos arises, the intuitive precision that guides you without doubt, the calm that others mistake for detachment, all of it was engineered in those quiet months when nothing seemed to move. Darkness built your foundation. You learned to see without sight, to navigate by frequency rather than form. You realized that light doesn't rescue the dark, it grows from it. Every inner winter was cultivating the soil for an unseen spring. And that realization changes everything, because once you understand the function of darkness, you no longer resist it. You enter it consciously, knowing it holds the next instructions. When the time ripened, the field began to quicken again. Synchronicities returned, symbols reappeared, energy started humming at the edges of perception. It wasn't that the signal had left, it had simply been gathering amplitude. What was once gestating beneath awareness began pressing against the threshold, ready to emerge. That emergence, that precise moment when the unseen becomes visible, is what I call threshold activation. It's the instant the cocoon cracks from within, when the inner frequency and the outer world finally align. It's where gestation turns to manifestation, and it always begins with a single pulse, the whisper that says, "It's time." You felt it before you could name it, an unfamiliar hum in the air, a current under the ordinary that made everything shimmer with quiet intention. After so much stillness, the sudden movement startled you. It wasn't dramatic, but undeniable. The field around you seemed to thicken, as if reality itself were waiting for your next breath to decide its shape. This is the threshold, the invisible line between preparation and expression. At first, nothing outwardly spectacular happens. A conversation echoes longer than it should. An opportunity appears in absurd synchronicity. Dreams turn predictive. Symbols repeat until they demand translation. These are not coincidences. They're coherence signals, the universe showing you that your internal architecture has reached resonance with its own. You've crossed a vibrational event horizon, where thought, feeling, and form begin speaking the same language. Crossing that line doesn't feel like victory. It feels like voltage. Too much light, too suddenly. You may notice your body vibrating, your sleep fracturing, your emotions spiking from elation to fatigue in minutes. That's the system calibrating to new current. When inner and outer finally match, the friction of misalignment dissolves and everything accelerates. Time bends, manifestation condenses. The gap between desire and demonstration collapses into immediacy. But here's the paradox: activation isn't about arrival. It's about readiness. You aren't being rewarded for enduring the dark. You're being entrusted with conductivity. The field can finally move through you without distortion. Every lesson, every dissolution, every night you thought would never end, it all built this channel. Now the current is live, and your task is to let it flow without interference. This is the stage where synchronicity becomes instruction. The messages no longer whisper, they orchestrate. A book falls open to a sentence you needed. A stranger mirrors your unspoken thought. Music plays with lyrics that answer your internal question. Each sign invites you to test the coherence, to act on intuition before logic approves. The faster you respond to resonance, the clearer the guidance becomes. Yet there's a temptation here to chase the miracles instead of embodying the state that produces them. Many mistake threshold activation for completion. They start collecting synchronicities like trophies, measuring progress by signs instead of integration. But true activation is less about spectacle, more about stabilization. The question is no longer, can I manifest? It becomes, can I remain coherent while everything rearranges to match me? Because rearrange it will. People may drift away, timelines may accelerate, systems built on your old frequency may collapse. The activation field doesn't preserve what can't resonate. It reorganizes reality around truth. That reorganization can feel like chaos again, but this time you recognize the pattern. The storm isn't destruction, it's alignment. You've seen this before, and now you can ride it consciously. As you move through this passage, notice how reality mirrors your inner state faster than ever. Doubt attracts static. Faith amplifies flow. Fear tightens the current. Gratitude expands it instantly. It's no longer theoretical. Emotions are levers now. Beliefs are switches. Every choice of focus ripples outward with visible consequence. That's not pressure, it's precision. You're operating in a feedback loop of immediate creation, a living dialogue between your consciousness and the field. And in this dialogue, you begin to sense your next identity forming not as persona, but as function. You realize you're not here merely to experience the quantum field. You're here to translate it, to give it form through art, service, voice, presence. You become bridge and broadcast simultaneously. Pause here, feel the weight of that realization. The activation is not an ending. It's the ignition of responsibility. The more coherent you become, the more influence your frequency exerts. That influence is sacred. It doesn't demand performance, it demands presence. The field isn't asking you to do more, it's asking you to be what you've become, fully, without apology or contraction. And when you learn to hold that voltage steadily, to live as the conduit instead of the seeker, you cross into the next initiation, the great dissolution. Because once light floods every corner, the final shadows must surface, not to destroy, but to clear space for sovereignty. Every surge of light draws its shadow forward. The brighter the activation, the clearer the residue it exposes. This is the part most people mistake for regression, the sudden return of old doubts, the resurfacing of forgotten griefs, the feeling that the ground is giving way again. But you, by now, recognize the rhythm. Illumination demands purification. Expansion always triggers release. At first, it feels merciless. The identities you built to survive, clever, useful, familiar, begin to unravel. Motivations that once drove you lose their charge. Conversations you once tolerated become unbearable in their smallness. You feel the old scaffolding of who I was collapse under the weight of who you're becoming. It's disorienting to watch your reflection change faster than your mind can name it. You might ask, am I dissolving or evolving? The answer is both. The great dissolution is not punishment. It's the alchemy of identity, the burning away of the masks that can't transmit your upgraded signal. The field won't allow distortion anymore. It loves you too much to let you stay compressed. The collapse of roles and routines is the signal of liberation, not loss. You are being stripped to essence so that essence can lead. Remember the earlier phases, the chaos that trained resilience, the darkness that built foundation. This is their culmination. What you practiced in fragments, trust, surrender, alignment now becomes non-negotiable. The tests intensify only to prove your stability. You'll notice life presenting you with echoes of old lessons, familiar dynamics, old triggers, the same choices that once split your energy. But this time you choose differently, not out of effort, but because the old frequency literally can't hold in your system anymore. Still, dissolution can ache. There's grief in outgrowing versions of yourself that once kept you safe. There's loneliness in realizing that some relationships were built entirely on who you used to be. You may try to shrink back, to re-enter the smaller costume just to feel belonging again, but the zipper won't close. Authenticity has outgrown imitation. The fabric tears the moment you pretend. This phase asks for ruthless gentleness, ruthless in letting go, gentle in how you witness your own shedding. You don't conquer this stage, you breathe through it. You let the identities melt like ice in sunlight, and trust that what remains is water, still you, just fluid. Every belief that dissolves releases energy. Every attachment that dies frees bandwidth. Dissolution is the conservation of soul, and something miraculous happens amid the loss. You begin to feel lighter, clearer, less reactive. The same events that once consumed you now pass through like weather. You respond instead of react. You observe without absorbing. What's dying is the reflex of distortion, the need to fix, to control, to justify. You no longer fight reality. You interpret it. This is the birth of sovereignty, not isolation, but self-anchored freedom. You discover that your sense of worth no longer depends on consensus approval, that your peace no longer requires external harmony. You can stand alone without feeling alone because you finally occupy yourself fully. From the outside, dissolution looks like chaos, quitting jobs, ending relationships, rearranging everything familiar. From the inside, it feels like accuracy. The puzzle pieces that never fit are being returned to the box. The storylines that exhausted you are closing their chapters. And beneath the endings, a quiet knowing hums. I am exactly where I need to be. Eventually, the dust settles. The grief softens into gratitude. You look around at the spaciousness and realize that the emptiness you feared is actually room to move. The field has cleared your slate so that coherence can become your new foundation. This is where the shift into recalibration begins, the stage when you learn to live without the armor, to navigate by resonance alone. It's subtler than awakening, quieter than revelation, but infinitely more powerful. For the first time, your inner frequency and outer life begin to move in rhythm. The great dissolution leaves you transparent to truth. And through that transparency, a new kind of stability arises not from control, but from coherence. What follows dissolution is not rebirth. In fireworks, it's the slow hum of coherence returning. The dust clears, the noise fades, and you begin to notice that your life moves differently now. The gears of reality turn with less friction. Conversations flow instead of collide. Decisions that once required analysis seem to make themselves. It's as though the field is finally breathing with you instead of against you. Coherence is the secret architecture beneath ease. It's not luck or privilege or divine favoritism. It's resonance, the alignment of internal frequency with external circumstance. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions harmonize, reality responds like a tuning fork catching a note. The field isn't rewarding you, it's matching you. You may remember a time when you forced life, pushed timelines, manipulated outcomes, strategized every move. That was the era of fragmentation, when parts of you ran in different directions and the universe reflected the static. Now your energy streams as one current. The difference is immediate. What used to take effort now unfolds through timing so precise it feels scripted. Doors open not because you knock louder, but because you finally match the vibration of what waits behind them. Recalibration begins with awareness of energy flow. You sense when a thought weakens your field, when a conversation contracts it, when an environment amplifies it. This sensitivity, once exhausting, now becomes guidance. You no longer need to chase opportunities. You listen for resonance. You move when the body says yes. You pause when the pulse says wait. Life turns into dialogue instead of monologue. But coherence is not constant bliss. It's dynamic balance like flight, constantly adjusting to turbulence. Old patterns still test your stability, but you recover faster. You notice when you've slipped into over-effort, when fear disguises itself as control. Instead of spiraling, you recalibrate with breath, with presence, with a simple acknowledgement. This is feedback, not failure. Imagine holding a compass that points not north, but true. That's coherence. It guides without argument. It doesn't shout. It hums. You feel it as ease in the body, openness in the heart, clarity in perception. When you're coherent, even challenges become precise mirrors, not obstacles. Life starts teaching in real-time, instant feedback loops that adjust your frequency moment to moment. In this phase, manifestation changes texture. You realize you were never summoning things from thin air. You were aligning with potentials that already existed. Coherence simply allows those potentials to materialize visibly. The universe stops being a vending machine for desires and becomes a dance partner in evolution. The question shifts from what do I want to what wants to emerge through me. And with that shift comes freedom. You stop mistaking uncertainty for threat. You start experiencing it as space. The future ceases to be something you control. It becomes something you co-compose. That co-creation, when anchored in coherence, produces a rhythm others can feel. People start saying, "I don't know why, but I feel calm around you." Or things seem to flow when you're here. That's not charisma, it's resonance transmission. Your alignment entrains theirs. But coherence isn't maintained by perfection, it's sustained by presence. When you fall out of tune, and you return not by striving but by remembering. A breath, a pause, a gentle correction toward truth. Over time, these micro-adjustments become instinct. You live as feedback and response, not as command and control. This is where many discover their authentic pace, the tempo of their unique frequency. Some move fast, like lightning, others slow, like tide. There is no hierarchy of speed, only alignment of rhythm. When you honor your tempo, the field synchronizes with it, and life's complexity becomes symphonic instead of chaotic. You're no longer chasing alignment. You are alignment in motion. That realization radiates peace even in challenge, because you trust that every detour is calibration, not punishment. And as coherence stabilizes, a new question rises. What happens when this inner harmony begins to touch others? How do relationships transform when you no longer meet them through distortion, but through clarity? That's the next stage, the rewriting of connection itself, the emergence of relational repatterning. Coherence doesn't stay contained, it radiates. The moment your inner field stabilizes, your relationships start shifting in response. Some soften, some shatter, some dissolve without ceremony, like waves pulling back into the sea. It can feel abrupt, even unfair, how people who once felt central now fade into peripheral memory. But what's actually happening is reorganization. When your vibration changes, every connection must either recalibrate or release. At first, it can sting. You may want to chase, to repair, to explain. Yet deep down you know translation no longer works. You can't compress yourself into frequencies that once sustained you, but now distort your signal. That ache to belong in places you've outgrown is just inertia. Once coherence anchors, dissonance becomes unbearable. You stop pretending that shared history equals shared frequency. But not all departures are endings. Some relationships rebirth themselves. The people who can meet you without defense find themselves awakening beside you. Conversations deepen. Presence replaces performance. The space between you feels charged, alive, communicative. You no longer connect through roles or needs, but through resonance. You speak less to be understood, and more to share vibration. Silence, once awkward, becomes language. This is the essence of relational repatterning, the evolution from attachment to attunement. Attachment clings, attunement listens. In attuned connection, both nervous systems relax. There's no chase for validation, no hiding behind persona. You show up without armor because you no longer need to negotiate your worth. Love stops being transaction and becomes reflection, the field seeing itself through another aperture. Yet even this clarity demands boundaries. Coherence without containment bleeds energy. You start feeling what's yours and what isn't with surgical precision. The fatigue you used to call empathy reveals itself as overmerging. Now you can witness someone's storm without being swept into it. You can feel compassion without absorption. This is mature sensitivity, the ability to stay open and defined at once. Boundaries are not walls, they're waveguides. They allow your energy to move cleanly, to circulate without distortion. When you say no from coherence, it doesn't create conflict, it creates clarity. When you say yes from alignment, it amplifies both you and the other. People sense it, even if they can't name it. They start responding to your state more than your words. Of course, not everyone welcomes this change. Some interpret your calm as distance, your clarity as coldness, your refusal to rescue as betrayal. They were accustomed to the old version of you, the one who carried everyone's weight to maintain peace. But that peace was purchased through self-abandonment, and you can't afford that cost anymore. Let them adjust. Real connection can withstand temporary discomfort. Those meant to remain will learn your new language. Those who can't will drift toward frequencies that match their current lesson. Neither outcome is loss. It's orchestration. In the wake of these shifts, new alliances appear. People whose energy once intimidated you now feel like home. Collaborations form with uncanny timing, as if prearranged by unseen design. These are coherence bonds, relationships built not beyond dependency, but mutual expansion. You'll recognize them instantly. Communication feels effortless. Creativity flows. There's shared silence that hums instead of hollows. Together, you amplify. Relational repatterning isn't just interpersonal, it's global. The coherence you maintain becomes part of the collective signal, subtly teaching others that safety exists in authenticity, not performance. You model a new template of connection, one where empathy has edges, where love has boundaries, where freedom and intimacy coexist. And as this network of aligned connections grows, something remarkable happens. You begin to sense that the field itself is communicating through relationship, using people as mirrors to refine your frequency further. Each interaction becomes feedback. Each encounter, calibration. Life stops being about who stays or leaves. It becomes about what each exchange reveals about your vibration. This realization changes the social landscape entirely. You stop hunting for your people and start recognizing them by resonance. Some stay for years, others for moments. Yet every connection, pleasant or painful, becomes part of your refinement. From this relational harmony, something begins to stir the impulse to express, to create, to give shape to the frequency that's been tuning you. That's where coherence evolves into artistry. When relationship becomes resonance, creation becomes inevitable. Something inside you that once waited for permission now insists on expression. The energy that used to swirl as restlessness begins translating itself into form, words, movements, ideas, systems, offerings. You may not even think of it as creativity. It feels more like inevitability, like breathing out after holding your breath for years. This is creative transmission, the stage where frequency takes shape. You're no longer trying to make art or build purpose. You're simply allowing what wants to emerge to move through you without interference. The signal that once whispered in dreams now speaks fluently through your hands. The difference between invention and transmission is subtle, but immense. Invention strives, transmission flows. Invention asks, what should I create? Transmission asks, what wants to be created through me? At first, this can feel like losing control. Ideas arrive faster than you can capture them. Projects form themselves in your mind, fully realized. Conversations spark entire frameworks of thought. You start seeing connections between seemingly unrelated fields. Science and mysticism, data and dream, logic and light. It's as if the walls between disciplines have dissolved, because coherence makes you multilingual in creation. Don't rush to monetize it. Don't rush to define it. Creative transmission is delicate in its infancy. The mind wants to brand, the ego wants to perform, but the field requires incubation. What's emerging is more than product, it's pattern. You're midwifing information from subtle realms into tangible expression. To commercialize too early is to pluck the fruit before it ripens. Notice how the process itself transforms you. You'll realize that what you create is less important than the state you create from. When you write, speak, paint, or design from coherence, the creation carries that vibration. Others feel it before they understand it. The words might be simple, the music unadorned, but something in their structure transmits frequency. That's the hallmark of true creative transmission. It teaches without instruction. You'll see this reflected back to you. Someone encounters your work and says, I don't know why, but it calmed me. Or, I felt seen in a way I can't explain. That's not flattery, it's confirmation. Your art has become an instrument of coherence. The field now uses your creations as tuning devices for others. Creative transmission also changes your relationship to time. Inspiration no longer follows schedules. It arrives in pulses. You learn to honor those pulses without forcing them. Some days you channel effortlessly for hours. Other days, silence asks you to rest. You begin to trust the rhythm, to let productivity bow to potency. Creation becomes partnership with the quantum field, a dance between impulse and stillness. There will be moments of doubt. You'll question whether what you're expressing matters, whether anyone will understand it. That's the mind's reflex trying to reclaim control. But transmission doesn't require understanding to be effective. It only requires integrity. Your task is to stay faithful to the frequency, not to predict its impact. The field handles distribution with uncanny precision. And yes, there will come a time when the creative energy demands embodiment beyond personal fulfillment. You may feel compelled to build community, to teach, to collaborate, to give your frequency infrastructure. This isn't ego, it's the natural evolution of coherence, seeking collective form. What begins as solitary channel becomes shared current. When that happens, remember you are not the source, you are the conduit. The brilliance you express doesn't belong to you, it flows through you. Possessiveness clogs the current, gratitude keeps it open. You're part of a larger ecosystem of consciousness, using creativity as communication. Each act of authentic expression becomes both offering and signal, a ripple that travels farther than you'll ever measure. And every ripple attracts others vibrating at similar amplitude, forming networks of living art humans creating coherence in form. Through these transmissions, your purpose stops being a mystery. You realize it's not about what you do, but how you are while doing it. That realization leads directly to the next revelation, your role in the collective resonance. The symphony of awakening now unfolding across the planet. The pulse that once felt personal is revealing its true scale. What you took as individual evolution was never yours alone. It was a local expression of a global awakening. Each thread of coherence you've woven into your life connects invisibly to others doing the same. Together, those threads form a living network, a frequency grid that spans continents and consciousness alike. You may not know their names, yet you feel their presence in the field, people who vibrate with the same quiet intensity, who sense the same acceleration, who carry the same memory of why they came. This is collective resonance, not an organization, not a movement, but a synchronized emergence. When one of us stabilizes in coherence, the signal strengthens for everyone. When you hold calm in a storm, someone on the other side of the world finds themselves breathing easier without knowing why. It's quantum entanglement in human form, the invisible physics of empathy elevated to art. You've probably noticed how the world feels both more chaotic and more charged than ever. Systems cracking, truths colliding, timelines splitting between fear and possibility. It's tempting to interpret this as decline, but from another vantage, it's metamorphosis. Old structures are shedding the densities that coherence can no longer sustain. The collective field, much like your personal one, must dissolve before it can reorganize. In this landscape, your stability is not small, it's signal. Every choice you make from presence broadcasts order into the shared field. Every act of integrity becomes a tuning fork others subconsciously attune to. You don't need to preach, persuade, or convert. The frequency does the work. Your coherence is the curriculum. And this isn't mysticism, it's mechanics. The nervous system is an antenna, the heart an oscillator, emotion a modulator of amplitude. When enough individuals regulate themselves into alignment, the collective waveform shifts. You're not here to save the world. You're here to harmonize it. Salvation implies distance. Harmony dissolves it. From this understanding, service transforms. It stops being sacrifice and becomes contribution. You realize that holding peace is activism, that staying authentic amid manipulation is rebellion, that refusing to dim your light is ecological restoration at the level of consciousness. You start seeing every mundane act listening, creating, resting as part of planetary regulation. The personal and the global are no longer separate circuits. The more coherent you become, the more efficiently your energy transmits through subtle networks. People you'll never meet begin aligning through resonance alone. This is why Group 11 was never a club, it's a field phenomenon. A harmonic signature awakening in distributed nodes across humanity. Each of you an instrument, each calibrated through chaos, darkness, and dissolution, now playing in synchrony without conductor or script. There will still be dissonance. There must be. Harmony isn't sameness, it's diversity tuned to shared purpose. The field needs contrast to create motion, so you'll witness unrest, polarity, resistance, and yet you'll also feel the undercurrent of coherence weaving through it all, stitching fragmentation back into wholeness, one awareness at a time. As you live this, notice how leadership redefines itself. No longer the loudest voice, but the clearest signal. Authority is replaced by authenticity. Influence becomes resonance, not reach. The age of instruction gives way to the age of demonstration. You, simply by being aligned, become a mirror through which others glimpse their own potential coherence. And perhaps the most humbling realization, this collective shift doesn't require perfection. It requires participation. The field amplifies sincerity, not flawlessness. Every moment you choose presence over performance, curiosity over judgment, compassion over reaction, you strengthen the lattice. The transformation of humanity isn't happening in conferences or doctrines. It's happening in micro-decisions of consciousness multiplied billions of times. So when you feel the world trembling, remember it's not collapsing, it's recalibrating. When you sense chaos, breathe coherence into it. When you encounter fear, stabilize your frequency. That is the work, the privilege, the power of those who remember. And as this collective resonance continues to crescendo, what follows is softer, slower the integration, the exhale after the awakening, the wind down of transmission, where everything you've learned settles into lived simplicity. The sound that began as a whisper has become a hum beneath your life. It isn't something you chase anymore, it's simply there, steady, rhythmic, alive. You realize the journey wasn't about becoming something new, but remembering what was always operating beneath the noise. Every detour, every collapse, every revelation, each was the field guiding you back to simplicity. There's no need to strive for connection now. You are connection. The line between you and the field has dissolved into one continuous breath. When you look at the sky, you no longer feel small, you feel mirrored. When you sit in silence, you're not waiting for instruction, you're listening to the echo of your own coherence. This is the quiet power of embodiment. It doesn't announce itself. It moves through you in ordinary gestures, in how you speak, how you pause, how you listen. People may not know why they feel steadier in your presence, but you will. You'll know it's not charisma, it's calibration. You've become a living broadcast of balance. And though the path ahead still unfolds in mystery, you no longer fear uncertainty. You walk with it. You've learned that the unknown isn't empty, it's fertile. That every ending hides design, that every silence carries instruction. What you once called coincidence now feels like conversation. So breathe into this moment, feel how reality responds in real time, how your awareness ripples through the unseen lattice. This is what mastery looks like, not control, but communion, not domination, but dialogue. The quantum field has never been separate from you. It has always been your reflection, patiently waiting for you to notice. If these words have resonated, let them settle deeper than thought. Don't rush to apply them, live them in subtle ways. Let your coherence speak louder than explanation. The world doesn't need another sermon, it needs the steady presence of those who remember harmony when others forget. You are that reminder. You are that frequency. You are that signal, finally clear. Rest here for a moment in gratitude, then carry the resonance forward. Not to spread it, but to be it, because every breath you take now recalibrates the collective. And that, friend, is the quiet revolution already underway.